So here's why I think Cody Campbell's plan makes a lot of sense. And this is part of the same train of thinking as we see in conference realignment, in the playoff structure, and how college football is going to survive going forward and how it's going to be structured going forward, is that in the end, college football is unique and valuable because of the fabric of the sport that has been developed over 120, 130 years, where you have schools all across the country. You got to remember that this sport started functionally as glorified PE class. College athletics started as PE class, as physical education class, and has evolved into this. And you have regional rivalries. You have schools that have literally been playing each other since before World War One. Iowa State and Kansas State have been playing nonstop since like 1906 or something like that. We didn't have all the states in the country by the when Kansas State and Iowa State were started playing. We were missing a lot of state. We were missing quite a few states actually. College football is valuable not just because of the Ohio States and the Georgias and the Alabamas and the Texases and the Michigans of the world. It is also valuable because of the Iowa States, the Utah States, the San Diego States, the Delawares, the Coastal Carolinas, the Purdue's a bad example, kind of Purdue's because they're on the same level as Utah State about approximately. Those types of schools. College football is unique in that it has a team for everybody, basically. You either went there or your parents went there or your cousins went there or you live near there or whatever. There's lots of reasons that people cheer for college football teams that are unique from pro sports. And if you take away that uniqueness and you take away that element of college football and you make it look more and more like a professional league, more and more like the NFL, the less appeal I believe that college football has. I was doing a little bit of digging for this one. And for anybody that is not familiar with the Extra Points newsletter by Matt Brown, Matt is one of the best sports journalists that exists right now, as far as talking about college administration and the real nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty of athletics, not the X's and O's of what happens on the field or roster construction or anything like that, recruiting, none of that. This is talking about the big picture stuff. What moves athletic departments, what moves conferences, things like that. The continental structures, the continental drift of college athletics. He does a better job than anybody covering it. He did make a thing here in his article here talking about, some of the big, just kind of all this type of stuff. So in an unreported and little known fact, SEC presidents in March quietly authorized their commissioner, Greg Sankey, to split from the NCAA if he deems that the right move. And actually, right here, the Big Ten swung its support for doing just that. So right now, you have the SEC and the Big Ten who want to. They want to, if they can make the money work, they would love to split away from the NCAA. Now, college football specifically, moving out from under the NCAA is not inherently a bad idea. It absolutely could be done in a way to make this all better. So that way the NCAA, who can't stop getting things wrong, is no longer in charge of this thing. And you can have people with some common sense running this and restructuring it to make it viable as a long-term product, to make sure that we have as many competitive programs as possible. However, The problem is that the people in charge, and by the people in charge, I mean the people that kind of have a good chunk of the voting power and a good chunk of the, influence, I should say, in college football, is the SEC and then the Big Ten. I know we like to say the SEC, it's the SEC and the Big Ten. And to an extent, it is because the SEC is never going to be able to do anything completely by itself. They would need at minimum the Big Ten to go with, and I believe they would need at least the whole Power Four to go with. But at minimum, nothing can move until the Big Ten is on the SEC's side on whatever issue they're trying to do. But make no mistake about it, the SEC has more influence than the Big Ten. Unfortunately, they have created a little bit of a voting block because the Big Ten, for the most part, with one exception, which I will talk about here in a second, which was just reported on recently, generally speaking, kind of does whatever the SEC tells them to. Unfortunately, the Big Ten has really not had much of a spine in recent years to stand up to the SEC and say, hey, what you're talking about is dumb. It will hurt the sport, it will eventually kill the sport. They have not done much of anything. Now, to their credit, the one time recently where they have actually shown some modicum of a backbone was about this college football playoff model, the 5-11 model versus the 4-4-2-2 model. Per Greg Sankey, the Big Ten is not on board with the 4-4-2-2 model, which is good because that gives it less traction. And frankly, well, and we already know that the Big 12, the ACC, and the entire G5, nobody is on board with the 4-4-2-2 model except for the SEC. And apparently, I guess the Big Ten is at least hesitant on it enough to say maybe not right now. But the SEC, the Big Ten, at least showing some willingness to resist the SEC is a good sign. However, ultimately, the playoff format, I don't know that will on a long term basis. I don't know that that affects the. I don't know that that affects the viability of college football or college athletics in the long term. It does change the format. It changes, which schools, have an easier path to do things. Um, but ultimately the playoff kind of is what it is. It's mostly just it's a TV event that makes a bunch of money, and it'd be nice to have an equal representation, even though that will never happen. Um, but if we're really talking about the existence of college football and college athletics going forward, this is a big part of this. So obviously the SEC has pissed off basically everybody with everything that the SEC wants to do as far as what would be self-serving to them pisses off basically everybody because all of them are essentially vindictive to everybody that isn't the SEC or the Big Ten, are constructed in a very specific way to position the SEC and the Big Ten, and especially really just the SEC, as on paper, officially by the letter of the law, as better and more important than everybody else. That is the SEC stance on this. They believe that their product on the field is the only product that matters. Not just that it matters more. The SEC says it matters more. What they actually believe is the SEC is the only thing that matters. They believe if the Big Ten collapsed tomorrow and all of their programs shut down, the SEC believes that they would be fine. They would figure it out. And they believe that if that the SEC shut their doors, the Big Ten would not be fine. The SEC has a complex, specifically Greg Sankey has a complex that believes that it is better and more important, and frankly, the only important thing in college football. And it's pretty disgusting. Um, Fortunately, what is stopping them is the threat of antitrust legislation, which is which is a pretty big deal. Now, Cody Campbell's plan is to get an exemption, an antitrust exemption. Currently, there are only two antitrust exemptions that exist in the United States right now. One is for the railroads. One is a partial exemption for Major League Baseball. This would be the third one. And what that exemption would do would allow them to basically let everybody in college football pool it together and redistribute it there, and not require um and essentially let it be one power structure in there, which is obviously what antitrust legislation and it seeks to avoid is one source of power or one controlling power in any specific system. But if the SEC goes to a 4-4-2-2 model, that absolutely could provoke Congress to take action and to enact antitrust legislation and put a stop to this and put a kibosh on the SEC's entire plan, the whole thing. So that is why they can't really move forward with this right now, because they don't want to provoke Congress, which is such a fascinating thing. Yeah, right here. So here's a good quote. So Ross Dellinger said, the flip side with the 4-4-2-2-1 format, there's a risk of alienating a large swath of college football fan bases. Absolutely true. If you make it so that way, it's a more difficult road for everybody that is in the Big Ten or the SEC. Those fans will become less engaged and your TV dollars will be worth less. Just straight up. That's how it works. If you attempt to turn college football into a tiered system in which the SEC and the Big Ten are the top tier and everybody else is fighting for scraps and have an unequal chance at fighting for the, quote unquote, the same trophy, they will disengage, and that will negatively impact college football for the long term and for forever. It will degrade on the long-term popularity of college football. And it will could trigger unwanted intervention from congressional lawmakers and adversely impact relations with the two other conferences. The two other conferences being the Big 12 and the ACC. So right now, fortunately, the thing standing in the SEC's way of them completely destroying college football in the name of some weird ego trip on the part of Greg Sankey and the presidents in the SEC is antitrust legislation and a need for the Big 12 and the ACC to be involved in the future of the sport, because though the SEC wants to, even though the SEC believes that it is the only thing that matters in college football, and that if really it came down to the nitty gritty, that the SEC could survive on its own, but the numbers don't support that. The numbers support that even the Big Ten and the SEC could not just break away on their own and just do their own thing. They would lose advertising dollars. They would lose a lot of this in the long term. They would lose, why would Big 12 fans, why would ACC fans watch this new league? Like why would a Florida State fan, if let's say broke away and Florida State didn't get an invite to the SEC. Let's say Florida State was left behind in the ACC in what we see as college football, and then their new SEC Big Ten league. Let's say Florida State gets left behind. Why would Florida State fans watch Florida, Georgia? Why would they watch that? It's not even in the same league. You might as well be asking them to watch the English Premier League. I mean, it would be a different sport, play with different players, playing for a different trophy. Why would they even watch? Why would you expect an Iowa State fan to watch Ohio State and Michigan? It's a different sport, different league. You're not going to be able to get watch of those. You're not going to be able to get fans to watch those games that you were getting before, because you're not playing for the same trophy. You're not playing in the same league. You're not doing anything. And it just blows my mind that they can't seem to understand that what they want to do, while does on paper position the SEC as the clear dominant conference in college football, you could be killing college football in that process. And at that point, what are you ruling over? What are you presiding over? Like, you're presiding over a pile of ashes. Congratulations, you're the last one standing on a pile of ashes. What did you gain out of that? And it's just the SEC's entire view on college football just frustrates me to no end. Um, but fortunately, there do appear to be at least a few forces getting ready to step up and step in the way of the SEC. Um, but we'll see. Dial Chef says, "I'm surprised living in the South how many people only care about SEC football." That's what I'm saying though, is that there is a pervasive belief, not just with the conference commission, not just Greg Sankey, not just with the university presidents, but the entire conference, the entire Southeastern Conference, including the fan bases and everybody involved, believes that the SEC is the only sports league worth caring about at any level. To them, the Big Ten barely matters to an SEC fan. The Big Ten only matters to an SEC fan in that they might have to play one of their teams in the playoff. That is the only thing they care about. They don't care about the Big 12. They don't care about the ACC. They really don't care about the G5. The SES basically doesn't exist to them outside of when they want to play them in week 12 to get to goose their schedules a little bit, because they need a free win to get into the playoff to make sure that all the records look better. That's when they care about the FCS. But unfortunately, their plan would kill off the FCS. So instead of teeing off on the Citadel the second week of November, now they'd actually have to play like a G5 school and have to play a Big Ten school, which, you know, I'm sure the SEC would find a way to bitch about that, since they already said, well, our schedules are so hard that we should only have to play 8 conference games. Well, you know, that chicken might come home to roost at some point. But it's a very complicated situation. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people in charge of these decisions that are not connected to they're not connected to really what is the source of college football's power, which is the proletariat fan base. College football, more than any other sport, is driven by fans slash alumni. It is, the NFL is driven by viewership and fans to a certain point, because that's who drives the TV revenue and all that. But like, college football just isn't what it is without the fan bases and without the alumni that become fans and things like that. It just isn't the same thing at all. That is the source of college football's power, is the fan bases and all of that. And you stand to alienate a tremendous amount of people by intentionally trying to carve out the Big 12 and the ACC and the G5 and everybody else from your future vision of college football, because you have this weird superiority complex that everybody has, uh, filled your brain with, mistakenly believing that you are the only thing that matters. Greg Sankey, what he needs more than anything right now, is he needs what Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius had, which is someone to listen to, whisper in his ear and say, "You are just a man. You are just a man." Unfortunately, Marcus Aurelius had that because everybody loved him and everybody, they really liked him as an emperor. Nobody likes Greg Sankey, but he is. Hear me a second for any of you non-nerds, but for any of you nerds that do play D&D, play Dungeons and Dragons, if he get Greg Sankey's a character with a very low charisma score that grew up in a background who believed he was super charismatic and funny and all this, but he's having to find out that he's not he's not funny and that nobody likes him. He's that person. Um, And yet he has a massive amount of power because the SEC has a massive amount of power because they are worth a lot of money. And they are the first person at the table when ESPN and Fox Sports and whoever else wants to, write a check for a media deal. Yes, the SEC is the first conference they call. If college football were to break away from the NCAA, let's say in 2035, when all the current TV deals run out, I mean, the SEC is going to be driving that bus, potentially along with the Big Ten. Hopefully, neither of them are going to be driving the bus. Hopefully, there's a commissioner. Hopefully, there's somebody in charge of all this. Preferably, I would like Cody Campbell's plan to be there. Say like this new league, if college football splits away from the NCAA and you take the FBS as it currently exists and push it off to the side and say this is our new sport, and we say we're going to have conferences for the sake of just kind of breaking up teams. Which I do want to talk about of an interesting kind of potential side effect of this that you do that and then this whole thing gets renegotiated as saying these are the media rights to college football, not just to the SEC or to the Big Ten or whatever it is.